The night his son changed the locks, Bernard Kowalski slept in his truck. It wasn't supposed to be that way. He had built that house with his own hands, not figuratively, but literally, every weekend for 14 months while Darlene was pregnant with their first. He had laid the foundation himself, mixed the concrete, framed the walls while his back was still good enough to let him. That was 1987. He was 32 years old and so certain about everything. Now he was 68 and certain about almost nothing, except that the temperature had dropped to -11 overnight, and the heater in the F-150 wasn't doing what it used to. Clover was in the passenger seat. She pressed her big golden head against his arm and exhaled slowly like she understood. She probably did. German shepherds know more than people give them credit for. Bernard had learned that in the army, watching the military working dogs operate in ways that made even the best trained soldiers look slow. Clover wasn't military. She was a rescue 7 years old, with one slightly torn ear and a habit of sitting on his feet. But she had that same quality. She noticed things. She waited. She didn't panic. Bernard pulled the old army blanket tighter around his shoulders and watched the light in the upstairs bedroom go out. His son's bedroom. His son's house now, according to his son's lawyer. He hadn't even seen it coming, which was the part that kept looping in his mind. He'd seen ambushes in the Gulf. He'd seen men get turned on by people they trusted. He thought he'd learned to read it. But you don't expect your own blood to serve you papers on a Tuesday afternoon while your daughter-in-law watches from the hallway with her arms crossed. The papers said he was a financial burden. They said he had exhibited signs of cognitive decline. They said his presence in the home had become, and this was the word his son's lawyer had chosen, untenable. Bernard was a man who had once navigated a hostile desert with a broken radio and half a map. He was not cognitively declining, but he was 68 and tired, and his name was no longer on the deed. Darlene had signed it over to Cody when they divorced, something about a tax arrangement she hadn't fully explained to him. And so when Cody changed the locks and the lawyer sent the papers, Bernard had almost nothing to stand on legally, just a truck, a dog, and an army blanket. He drove to the Canadian Tire parking lot on the edge of Moose Jaw and sat there until morning. He had one call to make. He'd been putting it off for 3 weeks, ever since Cody's lawyer first made contact. The call was to a man named Hugh Renwick, who was a paralegal in Regina and had served with Bernard in the Gulf, and who Bernard had not spoken to in 11 years. The last time they talked, it hadn't ended well. Something about money Bernard had borrowed and been slow to repay. Something about Hugh's second wife not appreciating Bernard showing up unannounced at Christmas, but Hugh picked up on the second ring. "I heard," Hugh said, before Bernard could even start. "From who?" "Your ex-wife's cousin is in my curling league." Hugh paused. "You sleeping in your truck?" "For now. You're a stubborn man, Bernie. I know it, there's a shelter on. I'm not going to a shelter." Hugh was quiet for a moment then. "Do you remember my Uncle Gord? Uncle Gord Renwick, up in the valley?" Bernard remembered vaguely. A big man, wore suspenders. Had a beard that looked like he'd grown it specifically to have somewhere to rest his chin when he was thinking. "He passed," Hugh said. "February. Left his property to me because I was the only one who ever visited. There's a cabin on it, up past the Qu'Appelle Valley, near Crooked Lake. I haven't done anything with it. Haven't had time." He paused again. "I'm not giving it to you. But I'm not using it either. You could stay there through the winter. Maybe longer. We'd call it a rental arrangement. Figure out the numbers later." "What kind of shape is it in?" "Gord's kind of shape." Bernard didn't ask for clarification. He had met Gord once at a funeral. That was enough. "There's no cell service past the turnoff," Hugh said. "Satellite phone in the cabin. Gord used it for emergencies. Wood stove, generator that might work. I haven't been up since March." He cleared his throat. "I'm not promising anything, Bernie. It might be a disaster." "Okay," Bernard said. "Okay, you'll go. Or okay, you're processing." "Okay, I'll go." He drove northeast out of Moose Jaw with Clover's head out the passenger window and the heater finally working properly. which felt like a small mercy. The road past the valley turnoff was exactly as bad as Hugh had implied, which meant it was worse than Bernard had prepared for. The gravel gave way to packed dirt that had partially thawed and then refrozen. And there were two places where he wasn't sure the F-150 was going to make it through without sliding sideways into the ditch. He made it through both. The cabin sat at the end of a long clearing, surrounded on three sides by poplar and spruce. It was a log structure, the real kind, not the decorative kind, with a covered porch that had partially collapsed on the left side, a stone chimney that looked structurally sound, and a window on the south face that someone had patched with plywood, and, for reasons that weren't immediately clear, duct tape. Clover was out of the truck before he'd even come to a full stop. She ran the perimeter of the clearing in tight circles, nose down, reading whatever the snow had to tell her. Then she came back, sat in front of the porch steps, and looked at him like she was waiting for a decision. "Yeah," he said, "we're staying." Inside, it smelled like wood smoke and something else. Old paper, maybe, or dried herbs. The particular smell of a space that had been closed for months and held onto everything. There were 3 rooms. A main room with the wood stove and a kitchen area, a small bedroom off the back, and what appeared to be a storage room that Gord had half converted into a workshop. Tools hung on pegboards, canning jars on shelves, a box of ammunition for a rifle Bernard didn't see. On the kitchen table there was a Bible, a stack of Saskatchewan farmer magazines from 2019, and a tin coffee mug that still had a dried ring at the bottom. He found the satellite phone on the shelf above the stove, exactly where Hugh said it would be. He found wood stacked under a tarp behind the cabin, dry enough. He found the generator in a lean-to off the side, and after 20 minutes with the manual and a prayer to no one in particular, he got it running. He didn't find much food, but he'd brought enough from the truck to last a week. That first night, he sat by the wood stove with Clover's head on his knee and the fire popping and thought about Cody. Not with anger, exactly. Anger takes energy, and Bernard was past the age of spending energy on things he couldn't change. What he felt was something more like grief, the specific kind that comes when you realize a person you loved was never quite who you thought they were. Cody was 41 years old. He worked in commercial real estate. He had a wife named Shelby, who had never once in 7 years of marriage called Bernard anything except your father. When talking to Cody, like Bernard was a category rather than a person. They had a daughter, Maisie, who was 9 and who Bernard adored, and whom he hadn't seen since September. That was the part that really hurt. Not the house, not the papers, Maisie. He fell asleep in the chair, and Clover didn't move for 6 hours. He settled into a routine quickly, the way soldiers do. Up before light, wood stove reloaded, coffee on the propane burner, walk with Clover along the tree line, which he came to think of as the morning briefing. She'd report on whatever had moved through the night, rabbits mostly, once a set of tracks too big for a fox. He found tools in the workshop and started fixing things. The collapsed porch section first, then the duct-taped window. Then a section of roof over the bedroom that had started to let in drafts. Working with his hands had always calmed him, same as it had when he was building the house in Moose Jaw, same as it had when he was maintaining equipment in the desert. There is a satisfaction to physical repair that no conversation can replicate. On the 4th day, Clover started acting strange. She'd been exploring the main room throughout the week, sniffing corners, pawing at the baseboards, returning to certain spots with a focused attention that Bernard recognized as meaningful. Dogs don't investigate randomly. They follow something specific. On the 4th day, she went to the area beside a stone fireplace and started digging. Not scratching idly, actually digging, her paws working at the wide plank floor with purpose. "Hey," he said. "Hey, stop that." She stopped, looked at him, and then looked back at the floor. He crouched down. The planks in that section were slightly different from the rest. Same wood, same finish, but the seams between them were a touch wider. He ran his fingers along the edge. His nails found a groove he hadn't noticed before. He went to the workshop and got a pry bar. The floor panel came up in a single piece. It had been cut and refitted at some point. The edges beveled so it sat flush. You'd never see it if you weren't looking. Beneath it was a short wooden ladder and a darkness that smelled like earth and cold and something metallic. He went back to the workshop for a flashlight. The space below was roughly 1.5 meters deep, about 3 meters square. Not quite a room, not quite a crawl space. Shelves lined 2 walls. On them were 4 sealed metal containers that rattled when he shook them. A military surplus ammunition box that wasn't storing ammunition, a rolled document tied with twine, and a green canvas bag cinched at the top. He brought everything up to the main room and set it on the kitchen table. Clover sat across from him and watched with great professional seriousness while he opened things. The metal containers held coin collections, mostly silver, some gold, organized in plastic sleeves, the kind of patient accumulation that takes decades. He wasn't a numismatist, didn't know current values, but he knew enough to know it wasn't trivial. The ammunition box held bundles of cash, Canadian, mixed denominations, old but legal. He counted slowly and got to $46,000 before he stopped and sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The rolled document was a survey, a detailed land survey of the Qu'Appelle Valley property, hand-annotated in tight, deliberate printing that Bernard recognized as the handwriting of a man who hadn't wasted words. Gord's handwriting. The survey showed not just the cabin footprint, but a much larger boundary than Bernard had assumed. There was a second parcel, adjacent, that appeared to connect to the first. A mineral rights notation in the margin that Bernard didn't fully understand, but that the word substantial appeared next to, underlined twice. The green canvas bag held a letter. He read it twice, then a third time. It was addressed to Hugh, written in that same tight print. Dated 3 months before Gord passed. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you did what I expected and sent someone up here you trust, because you're too busy to come yourself, and that's all right. You always were the practical one. The property is yours. But the subfloor room and what's in it belongs to the house, not to me, and I want it used right. The coins and the cash are for whatever comes next. Don't let anyone tell you they're not worth anything. I've been collecting since 1971, and I know what I have. The survey shows the full extent. There's a mineral rights claim on the north parcel that's been dormant since your father's time, but I had a fellow look at it last summer, and he thinks there may be something to it. Talk to a proper lawyer, not one of those downtown ones who'll eat half of it in fees. Give what's fair to someone who needs it. That's all I ask. I don't care about the details. Bernard sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. Clover put her head on his knee again. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the poplars in that low, steady sound that prairie wind makes when it has room to build. He called Hugh on the satellite phone. Hugh drove up the following weekend. He arrived in a diesel pickup with his reading glasses on top of his head and a look on his face that Bernard recognized as the expression of a man who was working hard to seem less emotional than he was. He read the letter from his uncle standing at the kitchen table without sitting down. He was a private man, Hugh said finally. Seems like it. He never mentioned any of this to me. The coins, the cash, the mineral rights. Hugh pressed his fingers against his eyes for a moment. He came to my wedding, just showed up. I hadn't even told him the date. They sat with that for a minute. You need to see a lawyer about the mineral rights, Bernard said. That notation he marked as substantial. I looked it up on the generator laptop. Potash. That whole North Valley corridor, there are 3 active claims within 20 kilometers of here. Hugh was quiet. It might be nothing, Bernard said. Dormant claims die all the time. But it might not be nothing. And the cash? That's your call. I'm just the tenant. Hugh looked at him. You found it. Your dog found it, Bernard said. Technically. Clover, from her position by the stove, declined to comment. Hugh stayed 2 nights. On the second evening, after they'd eaten and the fire was going properly, Hugh said, he wrote, "Give what's fair to someone who needs it." That was always how he talked. never specific, drove me crazy when I was younger. He trusted you to figure it out. He trusted me to not be greedy about it. Hugh poured 2 inches of rye into each mug. Which is different? Bernard thought about Cody, about Shelby standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, about the papers that used the word untenable. Yeah, he said, it is different. He wasn't going to pursue it. That was his first instinct. He had his corner of a borrowed cabin and a routine that was finally giving him some peace. And the idea of lawyers and courts and Cody's face across a conference table made him tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. But Maisie called him. She had found his number somehow. He still didn't know how, maybe from her grandmother's phone. And she called one afternoon in early February on the satellite line. And when he heard her voice saying "Grandpa," with that particular 9-year-old uncertainty of someone who wasn't sure if they were allowed to be making this call, something in him that had gone quiet started working again. She talked for 22 minutes. She told him about her hamster, which had died in November and been buried under the back deck. She told him about a book she was reading about a girl who trained horses. She told him, in the careful, oblique way that children deliver adult information when they know it's heavy, that her mom and dad had been arguing a lot lately. He just listened. He didn't ask questions about Cody or Shelby. He told her about Clover and the cabin and the rabbit tracks in the snow. He told her about fixing the porch. Before she hung up, she said, "Are you coming back?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart," he said, "but I'm not gone." He called Hugh's paralegal contact in Regina the next morning. It unfolded slowly the way legal things do. The property lawyer reviewed the mineral rights claim and confirmed what Gord had suspected. The North Parcel's dormant potash rights had never been formally extinguished, only lapsed, and there was a mechanism under provincial legislation to reinstate them, provided certain conditions were met. It took 4 months and 2 trips to Regina and a surveyor who spent 3 days on the property with equipment that looked like it belonged on a space mission. During those months, Bernard stayed in the cabin. He finished the porch repair. He fixed the generator housing. He cleared a section of fallen spruce from the access road so the drive-in wasn't such a risk in mud season. Cody found out about the mineral rights claim from somewhere. Bernard assumed a property search, or maybe Shelby's network of information gathering. And the calls started in March. First from Cody himself, voice carefully modulated into a register that was trying to sound like concern and landing somewhere near calculation. Then from Cody's lawyer. Then from Cody and the lawyer together on a conference line, which told Bernard exactly how seriously they were taking it. The argument was straightforward. Cody claimed that as Bernard's next of kin, and with the previous legal arrangement around the Moose Jaw house, he had some standing to be involved in Bernard's financial decisions. He used the word welfare several times. He mentioned the cognitive decline language from the earlier papers. Bernard's lawyer, a woman in Regina named Audra Fenn, who charged reasonable rates and had grown up on a farm near Swift Current, and did not appear to be impressed by Cody's lawyer in any measurable way, pointed out that Bernard had found the asset was legally residing on the property through a documented rental arrangement, and had no diagnosed cognitive impairments of any kind, a fact now supported by a recent medical evaluation that Audra had quietly arranged 2 months prior. The provincial court hearing was brief. The judge reviewed the documentation and the timeline, and looked at Cody's lawyer with an expression that Bernard, from his seat in the gallery, could only describe as deeply unimpressed. The mineral rights reinstatement was confirmed. Bernard's name was on the relevant filings. Cody's claim of standing was dismissed. Bernard drove back to the cabin that evening without calling anyone. He sat on the repaired porch with a cup of coffee and watched the light go out of the sky over the valley. Clover sat beside him with her shoulder pressed against his leg. The poplars were coming in. It was late April by then, the first green, that particular yellow-green that only lasts a week before it darkens into summer. He thought about Gord, who had spent 50 years accumulating things quietly, and trusted a nephew, he didn't call enough to pass them on. He thought about Hugh, who had cried in the truck when he left on the second morning and pretended he wasn't. He thought about Maisie asking if he was coming back. He thought about what Gord's letter had said, give what's fair to someone who needs it. It took another month to work out the numbers, and Audra earned her fee in those conversations. The mineral rights were optioned to a junior mining company, not sold outright, just optioned, which meant ongoing royalties rather than a single payout. And the coins went to a reputable dealer in Winnipeg, who confirmed what Bernard had suspected, that Gord had known exactly what he was doing since 1971. Bernard kept enough to live on for a long time. He set up a formal rental agreement with Hugh for the cabin, and a parcel of land around it, long-term, at a rate that was fair to both of them. What remained, and it was substantial, he put into two things. The first was a Veterans Assistance Fund in Saskatchewan. Not a large organization, not a national body, but a small non-profit based in Regina that helped former service members navigate housing and benefits, the specific kind of bureaucratic maze that Bernard himself had nearly disappeared into. He had met the woman who ran it, Phyllis, at one of the court dates. She'd been there for a different case, and she had the look of someone who didn't waste time or money, which was the only qualification he cared about. He set up the contribution as an annual endowment, enough to keep them running without having to chase donors. The second was a trust for Maisie, not large enough to remove the necessity of effort from her life. He had thought carefully about this, but enough that when she was ready to go to university or start something, or need a floor beneath her, it would be there. He put Audra and Hugh as co-trustees, with strict terms about when and how it could be accessed. He did not tell Cody about either of these arrangements. Cody found out anyway, eventually, when Maisie turned 18 and the trust materialized. Bernard heard from Hugh that Cody was angry. Then he heard, a year after that Cody and Shelby had separated. He didn't know what to do with that information, so he put it down and didn't pick it up again. The summer he turned 69, Maisie came to the cabin for a week. She was 10 by then, almost 11, with her mother's practicality and her grandfather's stubbornness, and she spent the first day helping Bernard replace a section of roof shingle, and the second day asking Clover's opinion on every decision. Clover's opinions were consistent. Food, walks, and proximity to humans were all good. Everything else was open to discussion. On the third morning, Maisie found the hatch in the floor. Bernard had never covered it back up, had just left the panel leaning against the wall, the opening visible. He'd turned the space below into a proper cold storage, shelved and organized. "Is this where she found the stuff?" Maisie asked. "Yeah." Maisie looked at Clover. Clover looked back at her. "She's really smart," Maisie said. "She is. Do you think she knew what was down there? Like, actually knew?" Bernard thought about this seriously, the way the question deserved. "I think she knew something was wrong with that floor. Whether she understood what it meant." He paused. "I don't know. But she kept coming back to it. She didn't give up." Maisie nodded slowly, processing this with the deliberate thoroughness of someone who needed to understand things fully before she moved on. It was a quality Bernard recognized. He'd been told it was exhausting when he was young. "That's kind of what you did too," she said. "You didn't give up." He looked at his granddaughter. "Yeah," he said. "I guess we're alike that way." The sun came through the south-facing window, the way it did in the late morning, warm across the wooden floor, and Clover put her head down on her paws and sighed the long, contented sigh of a dog who was exactly where she needed to be.